If I say a bulrush, anybody know? Anybody ever heard the phrase or the word, the vocabulary word, a bulrush before? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I see that hand. All right, all of you just bought something. All right, and so that's about half the crowd here. So we're talking about a lot of folks nowadays will call them an area along a river or a lake bed, and it's almost typically have what we would call reeds or cattails or something like that, and so they would be there. So we're talking about an area where some vegetation has kind of grown up through the siltiness of the riverbed or the lake bed, and it's not ground, but it'll fool you. It's almost a mirage kind of thing. If you're a fisherman and you can figure out how not to get your hook caught, a lot of times there's some pretty good fish because they're over there kind of nibbling at the base of that stuff. And so we're talking about those. Thank you, guys. I tell you what, go ahead and put it on. Go ahead and put me on my notes there. We'll read the other together out loud in just a second. Put me on my notes. Thank you. And so we're talking about that. And if I say a burning bush, what's your immediate reaction? Anybody, you say burning bush, call the fire department? Is that what you think of? Take your shoes off. That's a response and all that's there. Response and all that's there. So burning bush, and we've got that kind of thing. Anybody else tonight? Anybody else? You have a burning bush you think of. Bill said take your shoes off. Anybody else? What do you think burning bush? You think wildfire, forest fire? Yeah. About through a shoe there? Yeah. So about through a shoe. Anybody else tonight? Again, typically we see something on fire, we try and what? We either try and put it out or we stick a marshmallow on a stick and run it at it, right? I mean, that's about the only things you've got, isn't it? Unless you're at one of those places where they're chopping stuff, and if they set the little volcano on fire of the onions, then you think, oh, this is pretty good here. And so when we're there. So we're talking about some things here in the story that are, I hear guys all the time say they're familiar, and I always look out at blank faces. So we don't want to assume things. We're in Exodus 2 tonight. We're going to read a few verses here. We're going to get a little bit of feedback, and then we're going to walk through God using our past to prepare us for future service. And I want you to catch that tonight. Nothing has been wasted in your life as a believer. I think I've got it. Yep. Nothing has been wasted in our lives if we'll surrender to God. Go to verse 1 of chapter 2. As soon as you get there, kind of wave at me, blink at me. Give me the high sign. If you're an ear wiggler, I suppose you could try that. And so, yeah, Jack can wiggle his ears.
I can do that.
I could pre-chemo. I haven't been able to do it. Every time I do it, I about pass out. I'm kidding. I don't do that. Verse 1, and there went a man of the house of Levi and took to his wife a daughter of Levi. If I'm saying Levi, am I talking about the genes? Help me out now here. Who am I talking about? Daughter of Levi in a distant relation here. Took a husband of the house of Levi. What are we talking about here? We're talking about a tribe inside of Israel. We're talking about a group of people that have a common ancestor, and that would be one of those 12 sons. His name is Levi. We are identifying him as an absolute positive, no way around it, Jewish person. He's an Israelite. Everybody with me here? That's going to be important in about 4 or 5 verses, if not that long. Verse 2. And the woman conceived, bare a son. When she saw that he was a goodly child, she hid him 3 months. In this instance, a goodly child is a male child. And all of us who've raised male children know that changes quickly. They become ungood children. Joji, amen. And back there. And I'm teasing a little bit. Why in the world did she hide him? Anybody? I really need candy, rubber bands, or something to throw at people here. What we got? Why in the world did she hide him? That's not normal, is it? Even you single folks in here know that's not normal, right? Right? Hey, it's 3. Let's hide him. And let's really hide him. Let's go take him down to the river and hide him down there with the crocodiles. That'll work out really well. Why did she hide him? Help us out now. Go to chapter 1, verse 22. Pharaoh said, there's too many of these people. Let me remind you, when you think about euthanasia, when you think about what Hitler and the Nazis and the totalitarians did to the Jews, whether it was Germany or the Russians, what they did to the Jewish people, when you think about that euthanasia and extermination and population control is new, I offer you Exhibit A. The quickest way is to kill them. And again, keep the women, make them slaves, but kill all the men because they'll rise up in a revolt. And so here's what we'll do. We'll just kill anybody that has a male child. We'll just put them to death. Verse 3. And when she could no longer hide him, she took for him an ark of bulrushes, daubed it with slime and with pitch. Why does the Scripture give us this much detail? What's that going to help it do? Where's my bushcraft, man? What's this bushcrafting going to do here? It's going to give it at least an illusion of being able to float, right? Oh, yeah. A little bit of waterproof and a little bit of float. And put the child therein, and she laid it in the flags, the tall reeds there by the river's brink. And his sister stood afar off to wit what would be done in verse 4. What's going to happen to the baby? What's going to happen to her brother? Let me give you a little time out here. Have you ever fictionally thought of a more dire situation? That the only hope for the infant is to put him in a handcrafted, hopefully waterproof thing, get him close enough down to some civilization and a different group of people, particularly the Egyptians. I can't be caught around, but nobody will pay any attention to his little sister. Can you imagine being the little sister? Don't let your brother drown. Don't let him get eaten by the animals. In 4 verses, we have an unbelievable amount of drama. Hey, we're pregnant. Oh no, we had a son. Pharaoh's killing. He's exterminating all the male children. Hide him. Can't hide him anymore. He's screaming too loud. The neighbors are suspicious. We're going to get turned in. They're going to kill him. It'd been easier to kill him when he was hours old. I can't bear the thought of him being killed now at 3 months old. In desperation, God will take care of him. I can't be caught here. You're in charge. See what happens. Verse 5. And the daughter of Pharaoh. Anybody see the hand of God working in this unbelievable chaos? Came down to wash herself at the river. Her maidens walked along by the river's side. And when she saw the ark, and boy, that beautiful word there, right? That picture of safety. That thing crafted by men's hands, but used by God as a means of salvation. You think about that long enough, you get real excited real fast. And when she saw the ark, she sent her maid to fetch it. When she had opened it, she saw the child. And behold, the babe wept. The baby was crying. And she had compassion on him and said, this is one of the Hebrews' children. She knows the law. She knows the edict. She knows what's going on. Look at me. And said his sister to Pharaoh's daughter, hey, shall I go and call you a Hebrew? Call thee a nurse of the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for thee. And Pharaoh's daughter went, that's a pretty good idea. Go. And the maid went and called who? The child's mother. From panic and calamity and high drama, in moments, hey, you come and raise your child, and we're going to take care of you, and he's going to be free from being murdered, and we'll discover in a few more verses, he's going to grow up and be treated as one of Pharaoh's kids. He'll have the best education and the best protection, and he's going to have a mom who's going to teach him about Jesus. Everything changes in a moment. Everything. Go on, verse 9. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take this child away, nurse it for me, I'll give you wages. The woman took the child, nursed it. She wasn't getting paid for 3 months, and all of a sudden she's on the payroll. Verse 10, the child grew. She brought him unto Pharaoh's daughter. He became her son. She called his name Moses. And she said, because I drew him out of the water. It came to pass when Moses was grown, he went out and his brethren looked on their burdens. He's grown up, been treated like an Egyptian. Everybody knows he's a Hebrew. He's done all this. Or she knows he's a Hebrew. He goes out and says he sees his brethren. He sees the other Israelites, the other Hebrew people. He saw their burdens, and he spied an Egyptian smiting a Hebrew, one of his brethren. He knows what's going on. This isn't get back to work. This guy's being cruel and mean. And he looked this way and he looked that way. You still with me in verse 12? And when he saw there was nobody looking, no man, he murdered. He slew the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. See the temper, see the rage, see the cunning. By the way, look at me. How many of you think sand's a really poor place to bury somebody? And he went out the second day. Let me help you. Cheat on your spouse. Do something that assaults your conscience. Moses has had a rough day and a rough night. He murdered a guy. He tried to conceal it. It's day 2. 2 men of the Hebrews strove together, and he said to him that did the wrong, what you doing? Wherefore smitest thou thy fellow? Verse 14, he said, who made thee a prince and a judge over us? You intend to kill me? As thou killest the Egyptian. And Moses feared and said, surely this thing is known. It's been a bad day and a bad night, and it goes all the way bad the next day. Because what's happening around him is not as important as what's happening in between his ears. Because he figures everybody knows now. And paranoia has turned to panic. These scriptures are sure dull and not interesting. I don't know what you're reading. But in the economy of words, we've got an unbelievably interesting story. Now, when Pharaoh heard this thing, he sought to slay Moses. But Moses fled from the presence of the face of Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian. And he sat down by a well. He's gone from the king's palace. He made one bad act. Look at me. He fought it with a second. He tried to hide it. He never tells his story. He figures nobody knows. And then all of a sudden, they know. And whether they told their guards and captors and their punishers. But it gets around and then it gets to Pharaoh. And whether Pharaoh is the Pharaoh of him being a child or whether it's his half-brother at this point, doesn't really matter. Kill orders put out. Slay him. Take care of him, and off he goes. That's where we find ourselves in verse 15. Where we find ourselves in verse 15. You've got those papers there. Let me help you with a couple of things to write down. Let me help you with just a couple of things. If you don't have one, maybe you grab one, share one with you. Should be some pens and stuff around. I'd like you to write down a few things there. Oh, I can't believe many lapses some of you have made to the back there. David, don't slay anybody. This is descriptive. This is not instructive.
You did good. Can't wiggle my ears. It's a thing.
I'd like to challenge you, and we'll see if we can flesh it out in this story. There are no coincidences to the child of God. There are no coincidences to the child of God. And there are no mistakes in the plan of God. Let me see if I can flesh it out for you. There are no coincidences to the child of God. And there are no mistakes in the plan of God. No coincidences to the child of God. I could write it up here. And there are no mistakes. My hands won't do it, yeah. And there are no mistakes in the plan of God. Walk back through those first 15 verses. Show me where you think there's a coincidence, but you can really see God at work. Where you see it to start with. How do you see it? See if you can see it in verse 2. Chapter 2, verse 2. See if you see God at work in verse 2. There's no wrong answers. Everybody just hollered out. She had a son, even though all the male children are being killed, right? What's happened to us? The baby's going to be murdered. See verse 3. When she could hide him no longer. For the most elite fighting force the world has known at this point. Chariots, soldiers, hierarchy. And these two little Hebrew slaves have hid a screaming, crying, nursing baby for over 90 days. Our children were small. I was walking home one day. One of them was crying and screaming through the brick wall. I turned around and walked back and said, God, please help this young'un. Stop screaming. And I walked in and her mother said, here, you're on duty now. And she left and I found her. And I say that to be funny. Y'all can laugh. And that's not exactly what happened. But anyway, and they're there. What else? What else is going on? What else is going on? Is she a master craftsman? What she pull off? She makes a watertight boat out of what she can find, puts her child in there, puts enough cover on it to keep the bugs off of them, puts enough goop on the outside to waterproof it and to avoid giving the smell of fresh meat to the animals that are around. Trust her daughter to have enough sense to keep what's going on. Can you not see the hand of God in this awful situation? There are no coincidences. There are no mistakes in the plan of God. That'll get you real happy real fast. The life of Moses here. And at the right moment, she comes down, and instead of this and that and that and the other, she goes, what's that over there? What's the little boat over there? What's the little basket over there? That's not natural. What's going on? Hey, Sally. And I don't know any Egyptian. So, go grab that. What's a baby? It's a baby. It's a baby boy. It's a Hebrew baby boy. They're devout parents. They have done what they need to do to this child to differentiate it from the other Egyptian male children. And she catches it, knows that. And hey, yeah, sure, go get somebody to nurse this baby. And I'll pay you. And from extinction and infanticide, she gets on Pharaoh's payroll. God's going to raise the deliverer of the children of Israel and going to make Egypt pay his mother a salary. You can do all the storying you want. You can tell all the tall tales you want. When it got to Moses, let me tell you about how I grew up. I didn't pay for a thing, and they paid my mom to take care of me. And God protected me. And God, by the way, is going to bless my sister through all this. And what should have been a disaster for a family. Worst time, the worst place, the worst surroundings, the worst environment. And now all of a sudden, let me help you for a second. The rest of the Hebrews are working just to be alive. She's getting paid by Pharaoh's daughter. What is going on here? I'd remind us, God prepares us and uses the events and circumstances of our life to serve Him. God is preparing us to serve Him. Preparing us to serve Him. Forced the Egyptians, fearful of the growing strength of the Israelites, forced them into hard labor. They're massacring, committing infanticide, as we mentioned, to the Hebrew boys there. And all of this, and then he's adopted, and he understands Egyptian culture. And then what should have been an ending. Look at me. How many of you think if tomorrow on the news was one of your pictures that you had murdered a stranger and buried him under some pine straw? How many of you think that might change the direction of the rest of your life? But if the president got on TV and put your picture up there and said, I want him dead, and every doofus with a slingshot and a knife going, okay. And now you're, what's the expression, public enemy number one? There's nothing God's going to do with me. I'm done. I am on the run from now on. Until they catch me, and then they'll kill me, and that'll be it. I had one bad moment and a bad decision to bury the guy. And I thought nobody was watching, but apparently somebody was. He's going to figure out later on God was watching too. God's preparing us. God's preparing us. He's preparing us to address what is ahead. He puts people and circumstances in our lives to develop us. He allows us to experience some things sometimes so that He can hone us and knock off the rough edges, to give us empathy and sympathy, to help us to do that. I wrote this down, and I should have made the slide. I didn't. I should have. What about it in your life? See if you can answer this. God has used what in your life to prepare you to serve Him? How? What's God used in your life? What's God used in your life? Has God used heartbreak in your life to help you be sympathetic towards somebody? Has God used a victory in your life? You go, hey, I've been there, I've done that, I can do that. It'll be okay. It's everything in me. It's everything in me. Every time I'm in any of my cavalcade of doctors, to just not go person to person. That would be a very quick way out of any of my doctor's offices. And just go, I don't have any idea how it's going to turn out, but I know how you can feel better right now. I mean, it's everything in me to not do that. It's everything in me to not just go in and again, if you've never been in one of these chemo rooms, it's just 4 foot apart. Drugs and chemicals and sadness. And since COVID, everybody's been alone in there. They used to have somebody could stay in there with them. It's everything in me. It'll be all right. I don't know how it's going to turn, but it'll be all right. It can be all right. It can absolutely be all right. I got it last week. Somebody said, you always knew it was going to turn out okay. And I said, if you mean by that I knew that my soul was settled and that I was winning either way, then you're right. But if you think for a moment that I thought I was going to see the end of August or the end of September, you're just as crazy as you can be. You knew that you always knew. You always knew. I went, you might always know, but I didn't always know. I wrote out the funeral. I said who I wanted to preach. I said if they weren't available, so I wanted to preach. My brother thought, you want 6 preachers? No, I got 6 people. 6 people. And if they can't do it, then you go to number 2, number 3. But don't tell them they're second or third choice, because then they'll make fun of me. And but I promise you one thing. In my heart's tuned a little differently to people that are serving, to the suffering right now. My heart's tuned differently. When I get 4 or 5 of these in a row, people from all walks of life who heard a little of our story, and they reach out, and the burden's heavy, and I want to sometimes go just, and then I go, no. They're reaching out to me because they know I get it. And they reach out to Andrea because they know she gets it. Let me help you. And Moses is here. And here is a man who is on the fast track, is a man who's grown up differently. He's never done the hard labor that his fellow Israelites have done. He has never suffered like they have done. And all of a sudden his life is a mess. And God is using this. He's using the courts of Pharaoh to have prepared him. And I ask again, what has God used from your past to help you now? Don't begrudge it. And it may be a whole lot of things. Maybe a whole lot of things. What's He using? God uses, and only God can, by the way. Only God can. Isn't it neat? What should destroy us can make us stronger. What should knock us down and what should kill us with guilt. Instead, we raise our hands and say, man, what a Savior. Who did what? Who forgave me my sins? And we get to talk about the grace and forgiveness of God. Isn't that pretty cool? You trust God through those. You trust God. I did put it on there. In what ways God used your circumstances to prepare something for you? What ways He done that in your life? In your life. Go to chapter 3 just for a second. Go to chapter 3. We got about 10, 15 minutes here, 10 minutes. Verse 1, now Moses kept the father of Jethro, his father-in-law. If he's got a father-in-law, Mr. Glaspie, what's that mean? He got a wife, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the backside of the desert. And I love the way the scripture puts it there, right? It's one thing to be in the desert. To me, the desert's the desert. But if you're really so far out, it's the backside of the desert. Man, that's really somewhere, isn't it? Anybody ever felt that way, by the way? Choices of life. You ever felt that way emotionally? Anybody here, you have the distinct honor of being one of the people who can be surrounded by others and feel completely alone? My mom watches somebody I know watches television with the sound off. And I'm going, I would never do that. Well, I just, I'm like, if I want the TV on, I want the sound. Otherwise, it's just creepy mimes on TV, right? And you're just kind of guessing. And again, if you're watching an old Godzilla movie where they're dubbing it and hello, then I understand it doesn't make any sense. But other than that, man, you ought to have on a little verse 1. And he came to the mountain of God, even to Horeb. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire in the midst of a bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush burned with fire, and the bush was not consumed. It's some sheep. And this is as good as it gets. There are no more fantastic buffets in the Pharaoh's house. There are no more servants waiting on him. There are no more people saying yes, sir, and no, sir. He is there doing the best he can, wandering around, trying to keep the sheep from eating the poison, trying to keep the sheep from walking off a cliff, trying to keep them there so he can come back with at least as many sheep as he left with from his father-in-law, who's his boss. And just like in one bad afternoon, everything changed, look at it. In just one moment, everything's going to change again. Count them for me. Anybody? I got at least three miracles in verse 2 of chapter 3. Anybody want to take a guess? There are no wrong answers. This is like new math. There are no wrong answers. You're good. The angel of the Lord appeared. That would certainly count in the miraculous, right? At least the supernatural. Typically, when we see an angel of the Lord in the Old Testament, we almost always assume that it's who? A couple of you said it backward. One of you said it one way. We said, yeah. The big word, the $50 word, is a Christophany. The smaller word is a theophany. But the idea that this is a pre-incarnate, in other words, pre-virgin birth appearance of Christ, the angel of the Lord. And boy, good answers, both of you there. So we've got God saying to Moses, "You matter." What else? A flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. Most things we know that burn something. And this one just burning and doing nothing. And then it's on. There we go. That's number 3. Thank you. The bush is not consumed. The bush is on fire. The bush is not using any known source of fuel. You got the angel of the Lord and the flame of fire out of the midst of the bush. There's a lot going on. Now, just be honest. I need to go from side to side and place to place here. If you saw what all this described here, how many of you thought, man, I've been in the sun too long? The doctor told me to wear a hat. I should have got me one of those gaiters that you can soak in water and wrapped around here, right? I knew that milk I drank this morning looked bad, but here it is. I done lost my mind, and I'm feeling bad for myself. Well, look at there. Verse 3. Moses said, "I will now turn aside and see this great sight, why the bush is not burnt." And when the Lord saw it, he turned aside to see. How many of you think that's an unbelievable decision, or a tremendous, decision he just made? Sometimes the hinge to what's next is just as simple. Let's see what God's doing over here. Let's see what God's doing over here. When the Lord saw, he turned aside. God called him out of the midst of the bush and said, "Moses, Moses." He said, "Here am I." That's always the right response, isn't it? What's usually our response? Well, I can't, and I messed up, and I got this, and I got this baggage, and I'm not real good at this, and I got stuff in my past. He's a murderer with a kill order out on him. He's been hanging out with the Midianites. He's working for his father-in-law. What are his skills? Apparently so much that his dad-in-law's got to hire him to do what they ordinarily, the job they gave to teenage boys. How many of us in here are a whole lot better at listing why we can't do something than why we can? That's what Moses says. And when he says, "Here am I." 40 years, if you allow, and he's not been 40 years on the backside of the desert, but 40 years here. And now, could you be more alone? Could you feel more neglected and left out? 40 years, no family. 40 years, no sister. 40 years of starting over. 40 years of paranoia. 40 years of what if. Here am I. And he said, draw not nigh hither. Put your shoes off from your feet. Put off the shoes from off thy feet. For the place wherein thou standest is holy ground. Time to worship. Time to worship. The right response to God dealing with us is to worship Him. He didn't argue with him, Rodney. He didn't give him a bag of excuses. He didn't bring up my history, my past, like I'm giving him new information. Anybody in here feel like you got to tell God all this stuff that He already knows? Moreover, He said, "I am the God of thy father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob." He rattles off here what we call the patriarchy. He rattles off here the covenants he has made with his relatives, how God has kept his promises to his people, the Hebrews. I am eternal is what he's saying. I don't die. I transcend all this because I made all of this. I'm about to tell you to do something, but you're going to have confidence in me for what's ahead. And I can tell you, you can have confidence in me just like they did, and he did, and he did, and he did, and we'll add your name to the list too. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look upon God. Now let me help you. That's probably a good response, isn't it? Proud, arrogant, hubris, doesn't know the God of the Bible. I'm helping God out. Lady we used to know, used to like to, she'd get cross with the pastor. She'd cross the pastor. She said, I'm going to take my tithe and I'm going to designate it for the youth ministry because you're doing something for God. And I looked at her one time lovingly and said, sis, I appreciate the sentiment. Number one, it ain't your tithe. And number two, it ain't my youth ministry. You give it to God and we'll figure the rest of it out. And your problem with pastor, you just need to work it out. Because I ain't going to be in the middle. And if you don't work it out, I'm going to tell them that you're sore and then we'll have a problem with both of us. She, by the way, never let me forget that. Appreciated it. Appreciated somebody telling her the truth. I mean, she wasn't ugly or anything to me. God's got a place of service for us. Starts with worship. Again, in your notes there, write this down. Moses gets a sense of the character of God. Moses gets a sense of the character of God. They've said it so much, Southern Gospel concerts and rah-rah services, it's kind of lost its meaning, I think, but I do like it. I just wish it wasn't so overworked. God is good all the time, and all the time God is good. Let me help you. God is holy all the time, and all the time God is holy. God is omnipresent all the time, and all the time God is omnipresent. God is righteous. God is just. God is always who He always is all the time. And to serve God, I think you got to have more motivation than compassion. I think you got to have a little bit differently. What did Matt say? Guy got saved, and about 3 weeks later he said, preacher, that tithing stuff you were talking about. He said, I don't know what you're talking about. It's tithing. He said, you mean tithing? He said, yeah, that. I said, that stuff really works. What else you got? And it's not just that. And we're trying to have Matt in several weeks or so and let him preach for us. And you guys will enjoy getting to know him. And he'll throw your heart about missions and all. But way before you serve God, if you just got the rah-rahs, that ain't going to last. But man, who He is. And secondly, He's got a sense of the presence of God. Now, by the way, most of us don't get this, right? If Bobby went home tonight, and the ficus bush was on fire, he'd try and put it out, right? Bobby didn't nod. Yeah, all right. All right, all the amateur arsonists in here, raise your hands. I don't make any more faux pas. I'm messing. He nodded. Several of them went, yeah. Is a place of service. Pity and compassion are not enough. Pity and compassion are not enough. I think it's better to tell somebody about the gospel with a full belly. But if all they ever get's a full belly, they're still going to die in their sins and they're going to go to a devil's hell. They need both. I think it's fine and thrilling that the Simmons have drilled and paid. We've helped pay for 3 wells built there in the Kenya area and the Samburu area, Samburu people. But if all they've got's water and not living water, then we didn't do everything we needed to. And I can trust Him. Now look at it for a second. Some of you know the end of the story. I'm done. Look at it. Moses signs up and he's still in the backside of the desert. You can trust God and not know what's next. Truth of the matter is, I think you have to trust God because you never know what's next. God would demonstrate his power and his wonders. God has prepared a place of service. Find it. Find it. Do it. By the way, I think that place of service for all of us starts in a local church. I think that's just God's agency, one of God's agencies of grace, where you can come and do this. Somebody, maybe you, I don't know. I can't. Maybe somebody here. If I did, I'm not ignoring. I just don't remember. See me, I think from 2015. They've done what I think is the only modern version of this that I know anything about. But a couple of seminary professors, one of them a statistician, surveyed across denominational lines, non-denominational tribes and groups, and they focused on 146 youth pastors, music leaders, senior pastors, Christian school professors, etc., full-time Christian workers, 146, and they analyzed these 146 people who fell and were out of ministry. And he said the top two things across the board, look right at me, I'm done, is they had stopped a long time back having any kind of meaningful, private walk with God. And number two, they had no real meaningful connection with a local church. So how can you be a pastor? You can just kind of come in and do it, but you're not engaged with anybody. Not accountable with anybody. Nobody's asking any hard questions. Nobody's praying with you. Nobody's talking. Nobody knows if anything's going on. It was done back in 2014, I think, published in 2015. The character of God, and then the presence of God, and then the place that God has for service. And for Moses, it was going to be, you go face everything you've been running from for 40 years. And as you do that, I'm going to do a personal work in your life, but I'm going to do a public work, and I'm going to free my people. And I'm going to use you damaged and banged up and full of excuses. And the people of God will never forget what I'm about to do through you. Bulrushes, burning bushes.